Okay, I guess I'll just begin again. We don't know how many are coming. I want to just reintroduce the course briefly and myself briefly, because I think he's here for the first time, Shoah. Yes. And some people have missed some sessions. That's okay. Hello, hello. This is Steve with us.
That's right.
This course is designed to help Baha'is and their friends introduce the Bab and Baha'u'llah regarding the bicentenary. Like Baha'is all around the world, I've been thinking of the bicentenary for the last 6 months, and the challenge of introducing the Baha'i faith to a wide audience, different kinds of people, different backgrounds. And I was a Unitarian minister 25 years. I started to befriend Baha'is and other multi-faith groups in the 1990s. I started reading Baha'i books quite a bit, integrating Baha'i understandings into my view of religion. And I've been teaching these courses that are 6 sessions long, and I decided, let me see if I can do that with the Baha'i faith. Break up the Baha'i faith into 6 2-hour sessions with discussion, and so that's what the attempt is. I've learned something about myself recently. I'm not a scholar. Some people accuse me of being a scholar. I don't think I am. I want to tell you why. I'm a learner, and I think I'm a teacher too, and I'm interested in the big pattern. Sometimes scholars look at a lot of details, and I find that I'm more interested in the overall patterns. And so I sort of forget details, unless I need them to understand a broad pattern. Here's an example of a very broad pattern. It shows you how my mind works. And I think this is good for introducing people to the Baha'i faith who've never heard of it. We're saying it's a new religion, but it's going to generate a global civilization. That's quite a claim. Here's a broad pattern that I see, and that is religious civilizations start out almost an abject failure. In other words, if historians were watching each of the major world religions get going, in the beginning it looks like a complete failure. This is a very broad and important pattern. I want to just give some background to that. For example, Moses, he's in Egypt and his followers are slaves, and they follow him out into the desert, and they're attacked by the Pharaoh's soldiers. And when they get out in the desert, they think, why are we here? We were better off back in the big city. So they're 40 years wandering in the wilderness, and it took about 200 years or so for a civilization to emerge that had Moses' teaching underlying it. And if you look at Zoroaster had no followers for many years. So he's a prophet of God, supposedly, and nobody's following him. And gradually he comes across a small kingdom and converts a queen and a king to his point of view. But they're small, and they're engaged in wars with other cities in what we would today call Afghanistan, ancient Persia. Took a while. So maybe 500 years after Zoroaster, there's a king called Cyrus the Great, and another one soon after, Darius the Great, who turned Zoroastrian teachings into a powerful new society, the Persian Empire. That took a long time. So if a historian had been watching, what happened after Moses, what happened after Zoroaster, they would say, not much. Then Jesus, Buddha briefly. Buddhism looked like some sort of a Brahmanic cult. It angered the Hindu priests and took a while to get going. And it looked like the people who were following Buddha were dropouts, spiritual dropouts. And their parents were very upset with them. But about 250 years after Buddha comes Ashoka, an emperor, who unites most of India under Buddhism while respecting previous religious traditions. So it took a while for Buddhism to get on the map of history. Christianity, had a few disciples, a few men, a few women. Some of them denied knowing Jesus. They got afraid to admit they were following Jesus. Jesus is crucified after a very short ministry, 3 years. And people thought Christianity is just a Jewish sect. There were only maybe 7% of the Roman Empire was Christian when Constantine, an emperor, converts to Christianity. Then Christianity's on the map. But it would be called a failure for a long time. Islam grew quicker, but Muhammad, the story of Muhammad escaping out of Mecca, he goes into a cave and they're trying to kill him, and there's his pursuers see a spider web and assume he's not in there. In other words, he was that close to being killed by his pursuers, and some of his followers went ahead to Medina. Here's another thing. Even after Islam started, in the first 50 years, there were 2 civil wars. If you were a historian watching this movement, you'd say, well, Muhammad integrated the tribes of Arabia, but then they had 2 civil wars. They couldn't even agree on, what the authorities were. So what I'm saying is, this is a very broad pattern. Religions don't look very successful for a while, and then at a certain point, they convert a ruler, a caliph, a monarch, an emperor, and then society, historians begin to see what this new religion is about. So Baha'is are claiming that the same pattern is happening again, and if you think about it, the Bab, he was martyred. His best teachers were martyred too. Mullah Hussein, Qudus, Tahirih, Baha'u'llah barely escapes. And then the Babis have trouble uniting in Baghdad. Baha'u'llah has to actually leave just to get away from all the chaos. Then he comes back and starts to get integrated again. And just as they're really rolling after 7 more years, he's exiled, Baha'u'llah, to Constantinople and Adrianople. So, this would look like a rocky start. If you're a historian watching this movement, it looks like fits and starts, not very powerful. Okay, so Baha'is are making the claim that the same pattern forming a new civilization is happening again. And of course it's not easy to see, because let's say you hear that Baha'is are trying to build a global civilization. You could say, where is it? This is what, 107 years after it got started? How come I don't see a global civilization yet? On the other hand, you could start to notice incredible changes toward an international society, as well as enormous obstacles. You could see a lot of good news and a lot of bad news. So studying religion requires what one of my students, I have a young student she's 25 years old, she says, Harold, you're teaching us time travel. So looking at big patterns, for better or worse, this is what I like to do. It looks to me like if you don't look at big patterns, you can't kind of see the story of religion unfolding for humanity. You have to look, to me, across dispensations. So, for example, in Judaism, there's prophecies that look like they point to who? Jesus. And in Hinduism, there's prophecies that look like they point to another avatar or a Buddha. But that's looking across large pieces of time. Prophecies in the Bible as a whole that point to Jesus or Muhammad or Baha'u'llah, depending on how you interpret. But when you look at the whole story of religion, it requires time travel. It's back and forth across large periods of time. Okay, and we're doing this again by introducing the Baha'i faith as having had a difficult but powerful start in another way. Here's another word that I found myself using a lot, providential. Providence is like one of the names of God. And there's a man who's an agnostic in one of my classes. He's very eager to learn. But he says, Harold, I hear you use the word providence a lot. And he wondered, what does that mean? What I just told you, to me, is an example of providence. That God, or the orchestrator of ultimate reality, is working through movements that look very frail. They look like they're about to get eliminated. And then somehow, with divine assistance, they seem to have a measure of success, and then gradually humanity sees something happening and more numbers come, society is transformed, and then you say, we have a new religious civilization. Because religion is so weak, most people don't believe it has any power whatsoever. So Baha'is are in a position of trying to reintroduce religion as something that has been important. It has generated civilizations. It has gotten corrupt. And that's why God providentially helps humanity again. Okay, that's a broad pattern. Now, in this class, I've been trying to break my own pattern of looking broadly and I've been trying to look specifically. So I've been listing. Come on in, please. No, it's all right. Come on in. Just that's why the door's open. You just walk in. This course I've been trying to identify storylines of the Bab, storylines of Baha'u'llah. And these are like episodes that a journalist, an open-minded journalist who's investigating of the Baha'i faith might identify stories or storylines. I like to call them storylines because just like on the news, they say this is the storyline, but then the story can be developed in a lot of ways. There's lots to it. So today, this is session 4. Last time we looked at the first 46 years of Baha'u'llah's life, from his birth until his declaration in the Garden of Rizwan. He was 46 years old then. He declared that he was the one who the Bab said was coming, he whom God shall make manifest, the promised one of previous religions, and that a whole new era was beginning, and that was very good news, but then the bad news was he's exiled. So he goes to Constantinople. Not all of his followers could go with him. Okay, and so we're picking up, if you look at I've numbered these storylines. We've studied 11 storylines so far in session 3. Now this is just 12 to 17, only a few more storylines. I'm going to completely emphasize only one of these storylines today, just one. The one number 15. Proclamation to world rulers and the lesser peace. I'm going to emphasize this pattern or storyline because I think this is the one that is impressive to most people that don't know about the Baha'i faith. For them to see that this prophet, whose name they cannot pronounce, Baha'u'llah, wrote letters to the great powers of the day, that looks surprising to people from a Western background or who are skeptical about religion. That this founder wrote letters to the most powerful leaders of the day over a year period, 1867 to 1873. So we're going to spend most of the time on that one pattern. Okay, but I'm just going to list the other ones. Look at number 12, exile to Constantinople. We already mentioned that. Then another exile, only 3.5 months, to Adrianople. This is at the very edge of the Ottoman Empire. I got to visit Adrianople when I went on my pilgrimage to Haifa. But we found a Baha'i who was offering rides to Baha'i points of interest. So he took us from Constantinople to Adrianople, and we saw things there. And then the next pattern I list here, internal conflict with Yahya. So I don't want to go into those details, but this is fascinating to me that not only are there external obstacles to the development of the Baha'i, in other words, persecution by religious and civic authorities, there's also internal problems. And as a matter of fact, that too is a broad pattern. Jesus had an arch enemy from within his own following, Judas. I think, who do we call the arch enemy of Muhammad? Abu Jahl. Jahl. I don't pronounce it very well, but you know who I mean. And Buddha had one of his monks called Devadatta. You feel like you're reading the same story again. So in addition to all this oppression that comes from civic leaders, and religious leaders of the day, all resisting a new faith, the emergence of a new religious civilization. There's also internal problems. So how many strikes against you can you have? Again, all of that illustrates that God is providing for humanity. That's why I use the word providence. Providence means even bad things, internal opposition, external persecution, even bad things, ultimately serve the divine cause to elevate humanity. It's just that human beings are impatient. We can't notice this providential pattern. So I'm thinking one of the gifts that the Baha'i faith has to humanity is to provide an eye to the ages. In fact, Baha'u'llah said his revelation was an eye to the ages. That name jumps out at me. I tried to write a book called Eye to the Ages, which is about the emergence of major civilizations, starting from very frail religions, looking at 13 civilizations, and how they had a lifespan. They went up, big in power. Then they started to decline, and then another one comes along. The eye to the ages, or the Baha'i revelation, or the idea of progressive revelation, helps us see all that. If we don't have that broad view, it's hard to appreciate that another might be emerging now. A lot of very, very well-educated, intelligent people say religion has died. You know, it doesn't count. It's only one little column in the news, right? So to reintroduce the pattern of something relatively frail and unknown can develop into a new global civilization. That's a challenge I think we have. The centenary celebration is a good excuse for sort of saying, well, what has happened in the last 200 years? You know, since the birth of Baha'u'llah, and what's likely to happen for humanity in the future. I briefly have to add, I remember thinking myself that Baha'is were claiming that this new civilization has already started and there's going to be peace and justice and prosperity for everyone very soon. They didn't actually tell me this, but this is what I thought they meant. And as I learned more, Baha'is were saying, no, we're told that there are further calamities coming, further tests for humanity, but eventually there will be a graduation. Humanity will reach a maturity point where we can actually form world peace, world justice, and world prosperity. Okay. And furthermore, Baha'is are claiming that that's not utopian. It's not visionary. It's sort of scientific. So what I've given you is this pattern that you can find in history, which grounds it in reality. Humanity's been through things like this before, but now we have the emergence of a global civilization that the Baha'i faith has a lot to do with it. That's the claim. Okay. Questions, comments? I'm sort of trying to reintroduce the course and the purpose of it and the broad patterns. And I only want to stick with this one. Well, let's do a tiny bit more. The first page, right after this proclamation to world rulers, which we're going to talk about today, exile again, this time to the Holy Land, or Akka, which is near Haifa today, and near Mount Carmel. And then the pattern after that, let me just read number 17. Sultan Abdullah, he's the caliph, right, or the ruler of the Ottoman Emperor in Turkey, ordered the perpetual banishment of Baha'u'llah to Akka in Palestine. But little was it known that this was a prophetic fulfillment, for the promised one of all ages, or the Lord of hosts, would now dwell in the Holy Land. This is a Baha'i perspective. Baha'u'llah didn't choose to go to Akka, the great prison there, was assigned and sent there. Okay, and now then I list some of the prophecies that this fulfills. King David had alluded to the King of Glory entering the gates. Hosea another Old Testament prophet, called Akka, a door of hope. Micah referred to one who would come there to northern Israel or Palestine from sea to sea and from mountain. This is just abbreviating prophetic utterances. Ezekiel, another prophet in the Old Testament, spoke of the glory of God coming from the way of the east. Isaiah, one of the outstanding prophets of the Old Testament literature, declared that Carmel shall see the glory of God. So to Baha'i ears, this sounds like a direct prophecy. We call Baha'u'llah the glory of God. That's what his title means. And Muhammad foretold the blessings of he that hath visited the visitor of Akka. I've been told that there's somewhere between 20 and 30 hadiths or sayings of Muhammad that talk about Akka. And if you could imagine the early Muslims listening to Muhammad talk about Akka, they would wonder, why is he talking about Akka at all? And, Muhammad was a caravan merchant. Maybe he had gone to Akka, but he was saying something was special about Akka. For example, blessed is he that hath visited the visitor of Akka. Baha'is interpret that as a prophecy of the emergence of the Baha'i faith and a new revelation in which Akka plays a very important role.
Can I ask a question?
Please.
For proving the source of this information concerning the Muhammad, he told that he visited Akka. Which source?
You know where I learned this? You see, I'm not a scholar. This is what I said in the beginning. I don't have it in my head. If I were a scholar, I could just rattle it out. But George Townsend wrote Christ and Baha'u'llah, and he refers to some of these, maybe about 10 of them. It keeps being, he says, and another hadith or prophetic utterance about, so there's several of them there, and I hear there's more than that. See? But that's what I mean. I'm not a scholar. Don't know kind of details. Okay. He might look it up for you. See, he's a scholar. He might look it up. All right. Now,
I disagree with you that scholars are the people who can speak. In this age, they would go and they check and they come back with an answer online. I just wanted to ask you, how do you define scholarship? What is a scholarship? Because
the scholars know much more detail than me. I depend on scholars. It's just vocabulary, and I don't want to argue. I'm a broad thinker, so I read summaries of summaries of summaries, whereas real scholars read the original details, and they dig under them, and they learn the languages of all the original scriptures. So I don't know Farsi. I don't know Arabic. I don't know Hindi. I don't know, what's the one Buddha spoke? I don't know that one either. You see what I mean? So what good am I? But I'm a teacher, though. See, I try to say it so it's useful to most people. I'm an interpreter. That's how I think of myself. I'm trying to learn enough to not make too many mistakes from a scholarly point of view, but show people the large picture. Because to me, the large picture is very, very exciting. That's what I'm most excited about. So when I started to learn about progressive revelation, that was helping me connect the dots of world history and world religions. And that's what I think humanity needs. That's what I'm giving myself over to. So I don't want to get lost in details. I'll leave this to scholars. It's very important. I depend on scholars. But I don't think I am one. Unless this, I theorize. I speculate. I try to come up with very significant generalizations. That's what I'm trying to do. And there are a lot of significant generalizations. Sometimes I think scholars are looking at the trees and they don't see the forest. See, I like to look at the forest. Don't bother me about the trees. That's what I mean. I'm just saying that I have a role, but I don't think it's scholarship. It's overall understanding. That's what I'm aiming at. So public courses are inviting people to get a broad view, and details, people can find them. You're right, you can look them up pretty easy right now. We have this thing called ocean, right? We can come up with a phrase and find out where it came from, when that was written, who wrote it. Very good. Okay. Roya, can you read pattern 15? And I want to first introduce it. The first part of 15 there is from this book. This is called The Prisoner and the Kings. And this is written by a journalist named William Sears, who became a hand of the cause, an important person in the Baha'i faith. But he's a journalist. I'm studying journalists these days. See, he's trying to say quickly how important this pattern is, that a prisoner wrote letters to kings, the most powerful kings, in the middle of the 19th century. So I quote how the book began, and then I add something. Can you read what it says there?
Proclamation to world rulers and the lesser peace. The prisoner and the kings tells the story of the greatest mystery of modern times. Between 1867 and 1873, a solitary prisoner in a Turkish penal colony wrote a series of letters to the kings and emperors of the day that predicted with amazing accuracy the course of modern history: the fall of nations, the overthrow of individual monarchs, the decline of religious institutions, the rise of world communism, the birth of the State of Israel, and the threat of nuclear contamination. The prisoner was Baha'u'llah, one of the most remarkable figures in this or any age. What was the secret behind this handful of amazing communications? What was the source of the prisoner's knowledge? And what did the letters have to say about us and our future? Among the most important of Baha'u'llah's letters to world rulers were those to Queen Victoria, Napoleon III, Tsar Alexander II, Pope Pius IX, and Nasruddin Shah, calling upon them to recognize his divine authority, reconcile their differences, reduce armaments, rule justly, lift the poor, and commit themselves to the security.
Okay, so that's a summary of a very complex storyline that this wrote a lot of letters to rulers of the day. So we're looking at that big pattern mostly tonight, okay, and the significance of it. And I want to prove to you that I picked out 5 of these rulers, and it wasn't just me that picked them out. Baha'u'llah picked them out, because he put letters to those 5 rulers in something that we now call the summons of the Lord of Hosts. You have the summons of the Lord of Hosts, and that has the surah of the temple, and it has his letters to kings in general, and then specific letters to each of these 5. He wanted them together. So, in other words, he thinks that will be very significant for humanity to understand for a long period of time, over several centuries. Okay, so we'll emphasize these 5. Now, I want to talk about, in the middle of the 19th century, if there was a term, great powers, and those great powers included England and France and Germany and Russia and Austria-Hungary, and there was something called the Holy Roman Empire. Have you ever heard of this? And that's not one place, but it means the relationship between the Pope, the head of the Roman Catholic Church, and certain kings that were Roman Catholic. They might have been in Germany, they might have been in Austria, they might have been in France. Okay. They were not in England, but the other, so the European, mainland Europe. Okay, anyway, that's another great power. And some historians have said, well, the Holy Roman Empire was not holy, and it was not Roman, and it was not an empire. But still, the collaboration between popes and kings was very important over about 1,200 years. From 1800 to 1870, I think it collapsed in 1870. I want to bring something else to your attention. But let me finish with the great powers. So England, France, Germany, Austria, Hungary, Russia, the Holy Roman Empire. Now you can add Turkey and Persia too. Now Turkey, though, that's at the end, near the end, or close to the decline, the final decline, you might say, of the Ottoman Turkish Empire. And Persia still had some power too. Okay, you notice who's not on the list? China. And India is not on the list. The U.S. is not on the list yet, later. But so these are the great powers of the day. Baha'u'llah also wrote to the rulers of the Americas too. He must have known something was going to come later. When you have innate knowledge, you can be ahead of the curve of ordinary information. But so those are the great powers of that day. Now here's a theory. Now I'm talking only. I'm not blaming this on the Baha'i faith. To me, 1870 is a really important date because a couple of things happen. One is, we'll see that Baha'u'llah wrote to Napoleon III twice. And he was considered the ruling monarch in the middle of the 19th century in Europe. The one with the most administrative talent and, most respect, you might say. So, but he ignored two of Baha'u'llah's letters. And Baha'u'llah said, you're going to lose all your power very suddenly. And he did. This is kind of a shock. In 1870, there's something called the Franco-Prussian War. No one would suspect Prussians, which is another way of saying Germany plus a few other areas, could defeat France. But they did. 100,000 are killed. And then to make it worse, then France itself goes into a civil war right after this big war. Okay, now here's another thing. I think we could mark the decline of Western Christian civilization right then. Here, the Pope, guess who the Pope depended on to defend him? Napoleon. So if Napoleon falls, the Pope is variable, and in fact, Victor Emmanuel in Italy reduced the Pope to that little piece of land called the Vatican. 1,000 people live there, work for the Pope. So the Pope, the Holy Roman Empire was reduced to a tiny little area, and the Pope was like a prisoner in the Vatican after this. So 1870 to me is a big turning point. So you could say also things really started going wrong for the Ottoman Empire too. So it looks like in 18 marks the beginning of the decline in Christian civilization and the decline of Middle Eastern Islamic civilization also. And here's another interesting little fact. Arnold Toynbee, who's a macro historian looking at the big picture, he was once asked, when did world consciousness begin? And the question is not when did people see? There were always people who studied world history to some degree, they're aware of other regions. But when did the average person start to care about world history? When did a consciousness of the world and its various nations and civilizations, when did that become more commonplace? He thought it was in the early 1870s. This, to me, is very, very interesting. So this time that is very important as far as Baha'u'llah is concerned, that's right in the middle of his letters to world rulers between 1867 and 1873. We're talking about 1870 right now. Arnold Toynbee said, a sense of world consciousness emerged. People became aware of the world as a set of nations and empires in relationship to each other. Wow! World consciousness emerging for most people. So the period of time we're studying tonight is really important, I believe. That's why I focus a lot of energy on these letters. Okay, questions, comments? Homayun, I told them earlier I was a scholar, that you're a scholar and he's a scholar. All I know is big pictures. And I need scholars for some details, but I'm basically trying to educate the public and Baha'is in getting a sense of what happened over the last 200 years that the Baha'i faith is related to, right? That kind of significant stuff.
Did you tell them they're unpaid sidekicks?
You're an unpaid sidekick. Okay.
Harold,
Please.
the examples that Toynbee gives, that
World consciousness
Yeah.
to emerge.
You know, I don't remember the details, but it's along the line of these powers. These powers were, for example, England, France, and Germany started to have colonies. For example, Africa. Africa was being carved up by these powers. And China was starting to be carved up, right? And India had already been taken over by the British. And so
colonization, right?
colonization. And so I think people see this made people aware of, oh, these superpowers are sort of have their feelers and their control and their economic development all over the world. Maybe that he was thinking that people started to think in terms of a world as interrelated, and that the powers have brought that to light. They brought that. Okay, that's some of it. That's some of it.
What was, Arnold Toynbee's criteria to think that 1870 was the beginning of the world?
That's what she asked. Is that it wasn't world consciousness on the average person's part, not scholars. Scholars already knew about. Most people became aware of world history and a world that's interrelated through certain. Anyway, that's enough on that. Okay. Now, look at page 3, if you would. Now, you know, these letters, boy, if you put all the letters together, maybe it would be a book about this fact. You see,
It is.
yeah,
Proclamation. of
Proclamation to the Kings. That's what the title was, right? So this summons of the Lord of Hosts is something slightly different. It's a subset of those letters plus this Surah of the Temple, right? And a few other, okay. Anyway, but what I'm trying to do is, like, I pulled out some things here, 2 paragraphs worth that you could find in Gleanings or Promised Day Has Come. But I'm trying to get at the essence of these letters to the kings. Okay? Steve, can you read this, O Kings of the Earth, that first paragraph there? And this is I'm summarizing. I'm taking things from hither and yon, but look, to get at the essence of the letters to the kings. Okay.
Yeah, which one, 1863?
No.
Page 3.
Page 3, where it
Down
says,
there,
O
like-
Kings of the Earth, in italics. That means scripture,
O
according to Baha'i.
kings of the earth, give ear unto the voice of God. Set your heart towards the face of God, and abandon that which your desires have bidden you to follow. The time must come when the imperative necessity for the holding of a vast and all-embracing assemblage of men will be universally realized. Consider such ways and means as will lay the foundation of the world's great. The great powers should resolve, for the sake of the tranquility of the peoples of the earth, to be fully reconciled among themselves. Should any king take up arms against another, all should unitedly arise and prevent him. If this be none, the nations of the world will no longer require any armaments, except for the purpose of preserving the security of their realms and maintaining internal order. This will ensure the peace and composure of every people, government, and nation. Fear God and take heed not to outstrip the bounds of moderation. Beware not to justly with anyone that appeals to you. Be of them that lead a godly life. Know that the poor are the trust of God in your midst. Deal not unjustly with them.
Okay, if you just consider the tone of this, And remember, throughout most of history, ordinary people did not even think of talking to kings this way. Right? In other words, why not? You'd be dead. If you didn't show respect for a king, so people wouldn't even let them think, they wouldn't let themselves think such thoughts. So it's a shocking thing that here is someone not well known to history yet, and was a prisoner, and was part of this offshoot of the Baha'i movement that no one's ever heard of, and he's writing letters to the great powers. You see that phrase, great powers? So, okay, I want to read you another one, another little piece. That's a selection. Here's another little selection. O kings of the earth, he who is the sovereign Lord of all is come. Worship none but God. This is a revelation to which whatever ye possess can never be compared. Here's the line that really knocks me out. Ye are but vassals. He's telling kings that they're vassals. You know what a vassal is? Like a peasant. Or, ye are but vassals, O kings of the earth. He who is the King of kings, heard. You see, this is rather bold, incredibly bold. To say such a thing, you have to either be, psychiatrically damaged, or you have to be a king of kings. I think there's no alternatives. You one or the other, right? The same thing could be said of Jesus. In this, all of these manifestations of God, prophets, could be interpreted as crazy or as who they said they were. You have to investigate that long enough to check it out. So it'd be nice if people would investigate Baha'u'llah's claims. By what authority did he speak, etc. Anyway, so that's some of the tone. You're doing such a good job. Can you just continue, Steve?
May I just
Please,
add
please.
something?
Yeah.
In Iran, when the kings were passing on the streets of any city, these people were saying, get paid to all people. People had to drop, and they could not even see.
Not even look at the
They
king.
could not even look at the
They bow
kings.
down and, okay.
So get blind, that was the message that they were receiving from the people who were coming with the king.
In the Mesopotamian civilization, the king or chief was held above the ground, never touched the ground. It was always held above, and then so you're higher than the ground. The rest of us walk on the ground, but not the chief. Right? So this is a very pervasive pattern, this reaction to kings. And here's someone saying, you're vassals before the King of Kings who has arrived. Anyway, okay, can you keep going, Steve, there?
Sure.
Now that you have refused.
Now that you have refused the most great peace, hold fast to the lesser peace, that you may in some measure better your own condition and that of your dependents. If you pay no heed to these counsels, divine chastisement shall assail you from every direction. Examine our cause. I like that part, by the way. Divine chastisement. Examine our cause, inquire into the things that have befallen us, and decide justly between us and our enemies. If you stay not the hand of the oppressor, if you fail to safeguard the downtrodden, what right have you then to vaunt yourselves among men? Take counsel together, and let your concern be only for that which is mankind, and betters the condition thereof. That which the Lord hath ordained as a sovereign remedy and mightiest instrument for the healing of all the world is the union of all its peoples in one universal cause, one common faith.
So here the term lesser peace is introduced as opposed to the most great peace. And here's a quick interpretation that I have of this. You might have other views. The most great peace would be a moral, spiritual peace, deeply grounded in the heart of all humanity, from leaders all the way to all the followers. So it would be a total transformation of humanity. The lesser peace would be more of a political peace. It would be great powers following good, wise advice, like the advice that Baha'u'llah is giving them. So in other words, the kings were offered the most great peace. They could have created it, but they didn't. So he says, okay, let's try for the lesser peace. Here's another very crude analogy. I hope a thunderbolt doesn't come down from heaven, but you know, I do a thought experiment. Imagine a virtue pill. You see, this pill is that big, and you swallow it, and the next day you wake up and you have all the virtues. That is, you become wise, loving, kind, responsible, of service. You know what I'm saying? See, I think Baha'u'llah was offering the kings virtue pills, see, and they didn't take it. If they had taken it and understood what he was saying to them and summoned the nations unto God, then he said it in one sentence. Had they hearkened unto me, this is at the bottom of page 3, had they hearkened unto me, to page 4. I should have put this all on one page because these are so important, these two sentences. Had they hearkened unto me, they would have beheld another earth. So he's reflecting on the reaction of the kings. They didn't hearken unto me. Had they hearkened unto me, the most great peace would have begun. It didn't happen. Here's the next very important sentence. From two ranks of men, power hath been seized. You see where I'm reading? It's in bold.
No.
It's at the top of page 4.
Oh, okay.
From two ranks of men, power hath been seized.
Yeah.
Kings and ecclesiastics. That's such a short sentence that's so important. It just blows me away. So, I think Baha'u'llah is saying, well, you had a chance, you great powers, to bring about the most great peace. And since you didn't, God has decided to withdraw power from you. And not only you, but religious leaders too. Wow! You know, see, that's an utterance that's of profound historical significance. Is it true? Can this be investigated? Is it true? And I want to give you a sneak preview. Look at the bottom of page 6. I give you some historical details there. Falling kingdoms. A lot of kingdoms started falling like about this time. And anyway, we'll look at that. See, we'll look at some of those details and the implications of all that for modern history. Wow! So from two ranks of men, power hath been seized because you didn't pay attention to, you didn't swallow my virtue pill. You could have and you didn't. You blew it.
What do you think he meant by two ranks of men? The kings and estates, those two?
Two categories of men
Right.
that are highly stationed
Right.
in the hierarchy of power and influence.
Yeah, for sure.
Something like that. Okay, one other thing. Going back to the lesser peace. So this is called also collective security. Have you heard of collective security? It just means like all of Europe is in NATO, North Atlantic Treaty Organization. So they agree if any of their nations is attacked by any, the rest of them will help. So that's a basic idea. And Baha'u'llah is saying, do that. That's manifest justice. It's the lesser peace. It's only a step toward the most great peace, but it'll really help. You know, another way to put that is more sophisticated. It's outlawing war. It's basically saying, you know, if the whole world, if every nation agreed to provide collective security to all the other nations, that means as soon as anybody encroaches on any nation, the rest of the world stops them, and there is no war. You're basically saying no more war. You know, there's a philosopher named Immanuel Kant said something like this around 1800. He wrote a book called Perpetual Peace. And he was saying there should be a covenant among all the nations to defend each other in the case of any encroachment. That's the same idea. The idea was floating around.
Yeah.
Okay,
What's interesting here, if I could,
please.
if I may, is that I think it's easy to understand why the kings and ecclesiastics didn't listen to his message.
Why?
Well,
You have a theory about that?
No, it's simple.
No, tell us why they didn't. No, that,
No, really, it's just because of the power and arrogance that they had so much, they couldn't conceive of anything more powerful than themselves, because they absolutely controlled everything and everyone. Everyone was basically dirt under their feet except for them. So what greater power could be? But what was exciting was that Baha'u'llah feared nothing in telling them what he felt. And I like the point where it says divine chastisement, even that did not create fear. What is interesting about this whole period of message to the kings and ecclesiastics was only Queen Victoria who had the insight, and Queen Maria of Romania
later.
yeah, exactly, who had, so me tell, wow, the women there already have that divine insight, where the men who were the kings and ecclesiastics did not.
If I may
Please.
also add, Woodrow Wilson, the President of the United States after World War I, he spent 6 months going to Europe, and he wanted to negotiate a peace, exactly the same thing that Baha'u'llah had suggested, that if any of European countries are attacked by any, you defend that power. But they labeled him that he's mentally sick, and
Yeah, he had a collapse.
he had a collapse,
Yeah.
but he was the closest thing to Baha'u'llah's wish, and even the 14 things, the
Points.
divine plan, points
Yeah.
of the divine plan, he had 14 items for his teaching of the peace in Europe.
Coincidence.
But they ignored him.
See,
I have a point to make in here, Olive. If you look at history, you see power's always given either to religious leaders or political leaders. Philosophers never had power, never been leaders of the masses. Historians never been only religious leaders or political leaders. In here, when Baha'u'llah is talking about power being taken away from you to reign, has come through. But if you look at the present right now, who has the power? Again, it's still religious leaders to some extent, and mostly political leaders have it.
I
Then
think it's
what is-
much weaker than it used to
Much
be.
weaker, but what is here Baha'u'llah talking about? He's talking about democracy, power
Yeah.
taken away from them. They're not despotic. Until that time, kings ruled forever and ever, inheritantly. Like heritage is given to the son and after them and ever. That was the stock. And eventually King of England and many other kings in European countries, all of them become ceremonial kings. And the power was given to the people.
Yeah.
But it's still to this day, politicians are the true rulers of the world. So he's hinting at the power being given to the masses, power to the people. Like, a lot of activists keep yelling and shouting every day. So that's what he's talking about, the hint of the democracy.
I find this so exciting because, see, the Baha'i faith here touches on world history. This is the place where it starts to be very relevant to interpreting world history. I have to show you a few more things, and then maybe we have a break, or maybe we keep on trucking.
It's hinted in the Bible too, by the way, about the power being taken away from the kings, being given to the people. Also, eventually at the end time.
Look at the bottom of page, no, it's not there.
What they,
You know, never mind. Page 7 is Queen Victoria. I think, let me tell you an experiment I did. I wrote, I pretended like these people, these rulers that Baha'u'llah wrote to, were reflecting on their life. Just before they died, they were looking back at their achievements, including the letters from Baha'u'llah, and reflecting on the significance of that. That's called a monologue, a creative monologue. So it took me a week to write each one, and all it is 5. I gave you 2 of them. At the end, you have Queen Victoria and Napoleon III. We're going to have Genevieve read Napoleon III, if she's willing, and then someone else will read the Queen Victoria. And again, this is creative monologue, meaning I'm making it up, because as far as we know, they didn't do this. They didn't write down their thoughts at the end of their life. But what they would touch on, research that. It's all facts. It's just that we don't know that they had thoughts exactly at the end of their life, but they might well have. So we'll look at those two, and I wrote a couple more too. I tried to pretend, I did one for Nasruddin Shah. I did one for the 5 that Baha'u'llah picked out for the summons of the Lord of Hosts. A 5-minute created monologue. where I live in Abbotsford, we acted these out. Someone dressed up like Queen Victoria and had a British accent, and someone did Napoleon III. I have a friend who's an Anglican priest, and he did the Pope, and he used an Italian accent perfectly. Everyone was going crazy. This way, we were learning a lot of history. You see, you're learning the Tsar too. Tsar Alexander II, the Pope that freed, and who helped Baha'u'llah. He sent someone to advocate that Baha'u'llah get out of the Sea of Chalk and come to Russia. That Tsar sent somebody to do that? Interesting. And so, okay, we'll get to some of those. But I think I'm supposed to give you a break, and there's goodies. Someone brought goodies that we can distribute. Let's have a break. Yeah.
All right.
Help yourself, please. You want to be careful with the nut allergies?
It's very nice of you.
My pleasure, my pleasure. Easy to make. This one is just in case nobody...
Bold print there. This is my own summary. This is a summary of the importance of Baha'u'llah's letters.
What page?
Page 4, the bold paragraphs, the ones that are in bold print. What divine guidance was offered to the rulers of East and West, and what happened as a result of their arrogant rejection and neglect? Baha'u'llah asked them to examine his cause, investigate the divine cause of unity and peace, to reconcile their differences, reduce armaments, make collective security pacts, restrain oppressors, deal equitably with their citizens, demonstrate justice to humanity, eliminate slavery, establish representative governments, sell their immoderate ornamentation and expend righteously, put trust in God rather than their treasuries and armies, and summon the nations to the faith of God. Let me read the second bold paragraph here, right below it. Baha'u'llah asks world leaders to acknowledge the transcendent unity, majesty, and ultimate mystery of God, to see the continuity of his claims with all of God's previous guidance to humanity, and to view him as the fulfillment of scriptural prophecies of the longed-for promised one. I'm on page 4, reading about a middle, the second bold paragraph there. Ushering in the promised day, he, Baha'u'llah, promised downfalls and losses of kingdoms, the coming of 2 world wars, and related sufferings of Germany. He spoke of the poor as the trust of God in their midst, challenged religious leaders not to veil themselves from truth with their own love of leadership, and clarified that the greater the decline of religion, the more grievous the waywardness of the ungodly. You know, a question about why do leaders, both civic, government leaders and religious leaders, why do they resist new prophets of God? Why do they punish them? You know, one way to answer that is just simply say ego. They have power, they have respect, and now here comes somebody who's claiming that they're closer to the source of ultimate truth than these leaders. You see, I used to be a minister myself. I remember feeling a tiny bit jealous of the Baha'i faith. I'm supposed to be enlightened. I'm supposed to see, what humanity needs to do. And I'm reading all this stuff. I said, this is ahead of me. This is a bigger picture than I have. This is powerful. This is more eloquent than I can speak. You see, you get jealous. So why do you need me then if you have this? So, for example, I went through a period where I was going to try to trip them up. I was going to find some mistakes, that Baha'u'llah or Abdu'l-Baha made. I did a lot of research to trying to find some sign of imperfection. And I got more and more frustrated that I couldn't find it. Then I started entertaining the hypothesis, maybe what they're saying is true. maybe I should stop looking for imperfections and start to appreciate things that I agree with and what they're saying. But this is all painful. I'm describing pain, my own pain in accommodating myself to all this. Okay. And one little side story related to all this. I once set up a forum, a multi-faith youth forum. And so someone from my church, a young lady from my church, was on the forum, and a Jewish young person, and then Buddhist, a Hindu, Muslim, Christian, Baha'i, and they're all giving a little talk. Oh, I even had a Zoroastrian, because there's a lot of Zoroastrians in Vancouver. So all the youth are talking, and I'm the moderator of the panel. They're giving presentations. And I find I completely agree with the Baha'i youth, more than the one in my own church. So I said, that's interesting. Yeah, that's interesting. I said, oh. Anyway, so it's very painful to move around your inner furniture when you hear a new message. You have to say, oh boy, I understood that way. Now they're saying it another way. But I got through it, and I actually became Baha'i. A lot of people get threatened by it and will try to hurt it if they can. Back in the days when religious leaders had a little more power, they could hurt it. It's still going to happen. There's prophecies along the line of that Islam and Christianity are going to pair up to oppose the Baha'i faith. Have you heard this?
Yes.
Okay, I may be making it up. I thought I heard that somewhere. Let's ignore that until we find out. Yeah. Okay, now can you look at, can we hear, who's willing to be Queen Victoria? Anybody?
Oh, yes.
She looks like one, doesn't she?
We
Someone-
definitely should give it to a woman.
Okay.
You willing to read?
I am from the
She-
royal family, but I don't do good acting.
Okay. So she's on page 7.
I have no English accent, so.
Yeah, don't worry. Just say it.
Farsi accent.
Either did she is.
Queen Victoria.
The Queen Victoria monologue.
Yes.
When I became queen in 1837, the British was at its lowest ebb. Ever loyalty had lost.
No, lowest ebb ever.
Sorry.
Sorry, okay. Go ahead.
Royalty had lost all respect, and I was expected to be the last British monarch. However, I was able to discern wisdom in the advice of some of my consultants, including most especially my beloved husband, Prince Albert, as well as the 10 prime ministers I worked with during my 60
How many prime ministers? 10. Anyway, I was shocked by that. But apparently the current one has even more. She's worked with even more. Anyways, okay, so this shows how long she's been serving. All right.
during my 64-year reign. Dignity and honor was restored to the crown, as well as to the entire British Commonwealth. From Albert, I learned the importance of scientific research and technological innovation, for these were the very wheels of social progress. The great exhibition of 1851 at the Crystal Palace displayed Britain's wealth and technical advancement to millions of world visitors who were struck with wonder and awe. From Albert, I also learned to rise above party politics and consider the enduring well-being of all British subjects, rather than the all too fleeting power struggles in the governance of Britain and the Commonwealth. A great sense of beauty, transparent honesty, and royal simplicity became my guideposts. During the Crimean War in the mid-1850s, I eagerly supported the humane relief efforts of Florence Nightingale and the broader ideal of worldwide disaster aid. After Albert's death in 1861, I fell into deep despair, and for several heartbroken years found it very difficult to engage with public ceremonies and government proceedings. Prime Minister
Disraeli.
Disraeli persuaded me to reassume the sovereignty of our growing Commonwealth, including such matters as establishing the Dominion of Canada in the late 1860s. At this time, an intriguing letter arrived from a Persian prophet named Baha'u'llah. He praised me for ending slavery and for making Parliament more representative of the people. O Queen in London, he wrote, thou hast forbidden the trading in slaves. This is what God had enjoined in this wondrous revelation. Thou hast entrusted reins of counsel into the hands of the representatives of the people. Thou indeed hast done well, for thereby the edifice of the affairs will be strengthened. Most intriguing of all, Baha'u'llah seemed to refer to a coming global commonwealth, saying, that which the Lord had ordained as the sovereign remedy and mightiest instrument for the healing of all the world is the union of all its people in one universal cause, one common faith. I could only reply, if this is of God, it will endure, and if not, it can do no harm. Our Persian ambassador said I was the only ruler who responded to Baha'u'llah. In any manner, however limited, therefore, mine will be the only royal tradition to survive. I confess that I have long been attracted to the vision of a more united, tolerant, and peaceful world. And so when I became Empress of India in 1876, it was with a view to spreading humanitarian and progressive ideals into the Eastern Hemisphere. My Jubilee celebrations in 1887 and 1897 proved that high-minded royalty had been restored, and there was hope for a more just and prosperous world community. Perhaps it was the endurance and symbolism of my reign that gave a measure of global civility to the Victorian age.
Okay, during that time, her rule, there was relatively few conflicts. So that's what I mean, civility. There was some conflicts. Okay, global commonwealth, my goodness. And that sentence, that which the Lord hath ordained as the sovereign remedy and mighty, that may be the most important utterance in the Baha'i writings. That's just my opinion. Who am I to say? I think it's very, very powerful, that line. It's quoted, you see that quoted many places, and it was in this letter to Queen Victoria.
What is the source of this?
One place to find this is in Gleanings.
No, it's smaller.
I wrote it!
You wrote it.
It has all the defects of me. I mean, in other words, anybody can write one of these. It's like but I tried to, not distort facts, but I was interpreting how she might look at her life looking back. Okay.
Except those are factual quotations.
Yeah, those are quotations from Baha'u'llah, the letter to her. Okay, comments? You see the purpose of it? I think the purpose of it is something like to show Baha'u'llah was in dialogue with the great powers of his day. And their reaction to what he shared is very suggestive of what came after, for better and for worse. The whole, please, yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was just wondering, was Prince Albert there?
No. I think he was from some other country. There's experts who's nobody knows British history too well. No, he was not a commoner. No. He might have been German.
What's interesting is that She was
He was German, he was royalty, right? Yeah, anyway.
influenced by her, influenced her a lot.
He had to work hard to convince her to pay attention to technology. Then she saw the light. Also politics, I find it fascinating. He says, don't take the sides of the parties. You're responsible to all of the people in England and all of the Commonwealth. You have to rise above partisan politics.
And their well-being, yeah.
That, to me, that sounds like principle right there. Okay, let's do one more at least. The Napoleon III. As I understand it, Baha'u'llah had thought he had potential. That Napoleon III could have decided to, well, defend innocent Baha'is for one thing, but could have been a real leader toward the most great peace. And I was shocked to learn that in 1844, doesn't that sound like an interesting date? In 1844, Napoleon had written a book about the end of poverty, a treatise on the end of world poverty. So this shows you, I mean, to be able to write a book like that, using sociology, history, and economics, you have to be high-minded. So he did have a lot of high ideals. But some bad things started to happen, as we'll read. Oh, Genevieve, you willing to read that one? It's on page 8, I think, at the last page. Another monologue. Well, she's French. But she's, you know. But she has to read it in English.
Emperor Napoleon III monologue. When I became emperor in 1852, France had been in a state of disarray since the mid-Central European revolutions. Nothing could save France from her self-imposed chaos, but the Napoleonic legacy and a strong leader upholding humanitarian principles and a socially progressive man. Previously, in the 1830s and 40s, I gained international experience, military training, studied Enlightenment literature and the social sciences, writing a treatise in 1844 on the end of poverty. I was fully prepared to march at the vanguard of generous and noble ideals. It was clear to me and to all well-educated Europeans that only I could bring France both glory and liberty, making her the very model of an advanced, powerful nation-state. As emperor in the 1850s, I mobilized France through railroad construction, technical innovation, agricultural and industrial advancement, establishing board situation, and making Paris a wonder to behold in the eyes of the world. At the end of the Crimean War, I presided over the Congress of Paris in 1856, establishing a European balance of power on a just foundation. The 1860s brought the rise of my liberal empire, lifted most restrictions on civil liberties, and France became the envy of developing nations. However, the attempt to establish the Austrian Maximilian as Emperor of Mexico did not bear fruit. In the late 1860s, I received 2 strange letters from a Persian prisoner, a man calling himself Baha'u'llah, or the glory of God. He praised my intention to be an avenger of the oppressed, a caregiver to the helpless, asking me to investigate his cause and bring justice to the wronged. He even referred to himself as the most mighty bell, quickening the world and uniting all its people. My only thought in response to this grandiosity was that if this man is a god, I am two gods. But then he wrote again, saying that my sincerity about helping the downtrodden had been tested. And I had been found wanting, my pomp had made me proud. My kingdom would be thrown into confusion, and all power would pass from my hands as divine judgment. This Baha'u'lláh was viewed as a misguided visionary all over the Middle East and India. Meanwhile, the aggression of Bismarck and the Prussians,
yeah.
which I mercifully tolerated, did not bring me the rewards expected, and I decided to teach him a lesson. But to my horror and shock, my troops were devastated in the Franco War in 1870, and the French Civil War which followed was even more disastrous for my people. I was shamefully deposed and exiled to England, where I now ponder my fate in despair. My son, the Prince Imperial, was killed in the Zulu War, and so my lineage has ended. Such a humiliating downfall makes me wonder if indeed I'm suffering divine judgment. How could the tides of history have led me so far from my progressive ideals? Why did I let a personal quest for glory cloud my vision of a just and peaceful world? Could that Persian prisoner be just who he says he is? Maybe I should investigate his cause and bend my will to the voice of divine providence.
I heard that somebody, have some of you heard of John Tolstoy?
Was it Russian? Oh, no.
Tolstoy. Anyway, he's a Baha'i who wrote a book on consultation. But he's also a Baha'i writer, and he wrote a play on Napoleon, similar to mine, but much more elaborate, and showing him changing his tactics earlier in his career, and so preventing the Franco-Prussian War and bringing about, in other words, he did more what Baha'u'llah wanted him to do, and he tries to show how that would have changed history. I think that's utterly amazing. I love alternative histories. It casts light on what actually happened, what could have happened. Okay, so maybe that's enough. You get the idea. I'm tempted to read the one more. But anyway, any reactions to it? I hope what it does is it makes history a little... some people hate history. Here's a testimonial. I hated history because it's mostly about violence. And, learning about the history of religion, and that religion is involved in generating civilizations which do good things, add knowledge to the world, beauty, architecture, new laws, service industries. History way more interesting to me. I still see a lot of terrible things in history, but somehow these monologues make it alive. Like, somehow, it helps me look at the world from England's point of view. Like when you were reading, Queen Victoria, that's fascinating. Someone reflecting on 64 years. The Commonwealth is a big place. Like, it's 1/4 of the world's population if you have India in there, and all the colonies, British colonies. It's a lot of people, a lot of responsibility.
There was no record of Victoria being actual world peace thinker. Is there any?
Evidence of her being a world thinker. Well, I supplied what little of it I could. She liked the idea of a world commonwealth. Yeah, she was talking to, Benjamin Disraeli. She had to be persuaded to be Empress of India. And she said, I think I would like that because, wow, you could expand some of the universal principles that the British had discovered around. So you, in other words, you may disagree that she could have possibly said anything like this. Maybe you can make an alternate report. But I think Baha'u'llah knew what he was doing by writing her a letter. I'm just a hypothesis. I think he when he praised her, that was genuine. You know, helping get rid of slavery, that's good. Helping restore she expanded the amount of parliamentary representation too. She was on a democratic curve, you know, compared to other monarchs of her day. She was consultative. She actually listened to Prince Albert while he was alive. He listened to prime ministers. So, I mean, as monarchs go, she looks good compared to some that have been very, very bad. And as a matter of fact, of these great powers, she's the only one who said anything slightly positive. Please.
What is the Baha'i history? Because usually when you look at history, history is the product of the ruling class. It is the winners, the people who have defeated other nations and conquered other lands. And they have written the history. In Iran too. I want to know if you have found any reference to what is the true nature and what's the objective way of looking at history.
This is such a fascinating topic, I might get sucked in, but here's a brief response, quickly. Do you know there's something called the ABS, Association of Baha'i Studies Journal, and John Hatcher is the current editor. He told me he might want to put Baha'i philosophy of history on his list of possible subjects. I am fascinated with the light cast by the Baha'i writings on interpreting world history. See, I wrote a manuscript that's 700 pages called Eye to the Ages. It was an attempt to try to look at civilizations through Baha'i eyes. I think the Baha'i philosophy of history is that religion is really important, and it gives rise to civilization, same like Toynbee said. You know, Abdu'l-Baha's book, Secret of Divine Civilizations, the secret, I think, is that religion matters, right? If the religion is divine, it will inspire the parliament or the government. It will. So I think that book is a philosophy of history, showing what happens if rulers, leaders in a society bend to divine guidance. They will bring about justice. They will bring about service. They will learn. They will learn from other countries. Wow, so that would be an ever-advancing global civilization. I think the Baha'i philosophy of history is religion is God's attempt to educate and lift us up, all levels of society, including art, family life, etc. And you could evaluate history in terms of how close did various civilizations come to that. I found that the Chinese have ancient Chinese had a similar philosophy of history. They would record scrupulously the achievements and the misdeeds of their emperors. So history was supposed to be an evaluation, what we call reflection. You know, to the extent that they did that, you know, they could make improvements across time. And as a matter of fact, I'm not sure any civilization greater than Chinese, if you look at how long they've been around and some of the things that they've achieved. Anyway, quickly, that's it. So,
I have a question.
Please.
Just wondering if you know, was it Luther King who initiated, you know, the protest?
Martin Luther.
Was it him first? Or
No, not
was
Luther.
it-
It's a black man. Martin Luther is the.
Not the black man. No, that would be
King.
Martin Luther King. No, Martin Luther of Germany.
Yes.
Would you know if he was the first one who protested the?
Oh yeah, he started the Protestant Reformation.
So it wasn't a king.
No, he's not a king. He was a priest.
Yes, I know, but I just was trying to figure out it was him who started it or King of England. You know.
Oh, that was another wing of the Protestant Reformation.
Right,
Yeah,
yes.
it was broader, but it started with
It
the.
initially started with Martin.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Quickly, I want to show you something. Look at the bottom, page 6. I want to show you. See, Baha'u'llah said, okay, I offered you the most great peace. I offered you a virtue pill. You didn't swallow it. So what happened? Look at all these falling kingdoms. France, papal power, assassination of Abdulaziz in Turkey, 1876, assassination of his successor, 1896, overthrow of Abdul Hamid II in Turkey, 1909. That's called the Young Turks Revolution. And you know, Abdul Baha, son of Baha'u'lláh, got freed because of that revolution. Look at the other countries that lost their monarchy. Portugal, China, Russia, Germany, of course, and Austria-Hungary after World War I. Turkey, end of the Caliphate in 1922. Persia, 1926. On and on and on. And then India should be here in 1947, the end of imperial rule, right? In that case, it was that queen. But before that, okay, so in other words, it really did shift away from monarchy toward what? Representative government, you might say.
Don't forget Iran.
A dramatic shift, please.
Iran again in 1979.
Again.
Again.
Yeah. Many more lessons to... Now, I want to show you something else. At the bottom, look at 1882. There was a triple alliance, 1882. So this is after Baha'u'llah's letters. Germany, Austria, and Italy agreed to oppose France and Russia. Jump down to 1907, triple entente. France, Britain, and Russia agreed to oppose Germany, Austria, and Italy. Does that remind you of anything? The pairing up there? See, this was like a dress rehearsal for World War I and World War II. Furthermore, there was an arms race, right? Abdu'l-Baha referred to an arms race in Europe. Remember, he was talking in 1911, 1912. He was saying there's an arms race in Europe. The arms race had started earlier in the 1880s. And so look at what happened between 1899 and 1907. Peace conferences at The Hague attempting to establish international dispute resolution because high-minded observers of the world realized the next war is going to be like nothing we've ever experienced before. We have these great powers. They're building up arms. They're aligning with each other. These three powers against these three powers. When they fight, it's going to be horrible. So let's make rules right now. How should you treat your prisoners of war? Do you just line them up and shoot them? Or do you put them in a pit? Or do you put them in prison? Or do you take them to a hospital? What are the norms about how you should conduct war? They knew war was going to happen and it was going to be catastrophic, so they were trying to ameliorate it, help it not be so violent. Apparently, some Russians were involved in this, sort of the tradition that was interested in being Baha'u'lláh. There were some people that were high-minded. Anyway, so that's like, these are very like tectonic shifts in the earth that were happening. Here's another thing. Religion is very weak, right? After the decline of Christendom, the decline of Islamic civilization, religion is weak. When religion is weak, what gets strong is secular ideology. It fills the vacuum. So as religion is getting weaker, what's getting stronger? Communism, fascism, nationalism, and capitalism as ideologies. And it's interesting that that word ideology, I think it means a pseudo-religion, or it means a worldview that is broad and attempts to address the meaning of life. So it's like a man-made religion. Let's take capitalism, for example. Capitalism is like a religion. It says all your needs can be met by shopping. All we have to do is set up stores that have everything humanity needs. And we have to create a competitive system whereby everyone gets more and more wealthy, and then you can have all your needs met. So in calling that an ideology, in some countries I could be shot, like the country I was born in, the US. There's some where if you talk about capitalism as something bad, it's dangerous. Imagine what it was like to criticize communism, in the Soviet Union or in Maoist China. See, you're criticizing more than a belief, it's like a religious system. Anyway, because religion got weak, ideologies got really strong. this is powerfully important in terms of understanding, world history from about the middle of the 19th century to now. Islamism, I believe, is another horrible ideology. A very bad one is nationalism, capital N, where you think your nation is more important than all other nations. We won't mention any names of people who have that point of view. But it's very powerful. Some people argue, what is the strongest ideology in China? It's probably not capitalism anymore. Communism. Or it's not, it might even be, it's not incentivism, it's nationalism, probably. So nationalism is it's deifying the state. And so this is, I think what happened, what Baha'u'llah was saying, God is not dead. God is speaking again. We can align human values with new guidance from God and unite the world and bring peace and justice and prosperity and education and upliftment to everyone. Anyway, so I just think these letters are rather important. And people should, see it in a different perspective than they have. Even Baha'is. I think that the letters are considered by people who are trying to understand the world and the big change it made between 1850 and 2050. I'm arbitrarily saying those 200 years are like a transition from what? Nation states to the beginning of global community. Baha'u'llah's letters will cast light on what did humanity not learn during that time and what did it learn. Comments, questions, complaints? I'm only theorizing. Oh, well, the stuff I just said is Harold's opinion. You can ignore it.
Did Baha'u'llah say in all of the letters, if any king shall embrace this cause of God in this day, he shall be the greatest king for all time, or just one?
Oh, can I read? I got to read you part of what he said to, where'd it go? See, Tsar Alexander, the Russian guy. I'm reading part of my monologue for him. Okay. In the late 1860s, I received a letter from a Persian prisoner who was trying to reform Islam, or perhaps even generate a new world religion, a man named Baha'u'llah. Previously, I had sent my minister to prevent his execution and secure his release, and we even offered to provide a home for Baha'u'llah and his followers in Russia, but he chose to be exiled to Baghdad. Baha'u'llah believed that Tsar Alexander II, I could bring a great breakthrough in world history by summoning the nations unto God. See, maybe he said something similar to Napoleon. I think he did, but I don't have it in my head. We can track it down. Baha'u'llah believed that I could bring about a great breakthrough in world history by summoning the nations unto God, promising me a lofty station if I did this. He claimed to have heard my prayers for victory in Russia's conflict with Turkey, saying, "We answered thee in truth." And indeed, Russian forces defeated Turkey in 1877. On and on and on. Regretfully, I neglected the wisdom of Baha'u'llah. See, what happened is he got more and more conservative, because when he freed the serfs, there were all kinds of people criticizing the government, and there were attempts on his life. So he forgot his progressive ideals, which he had in the beginning, just like Napoleon did. He said, and I have him in my dialogue say, monologue, regretfully I neglected the wisdom of Baha'u'llah, who had written, "Blessed be the king whose sovereignty hath withheld him not from his sovereign." Blessed be the king whose sovereignty, small, hath withheld him not from his sovereign, capital S, or from God. Okay, but I think Baha'u'llah said things even to Nasruddin Shah, the archenemy of the Baha'i faith. Even he could have made a huge difference had he changed and swallowed the virtue pill. Even he. And Abdu'l-Baha was praising Nasruddin Shah in the beginning of that book, Secret of Divine Civilization. I almost fainted when I saw that. So there's a little book called Secret of Divine Civilization by Abdu'l-Baha. He says the Shah has started to reform. That's praiseworthy. I hope he continues. And then he keeps writing this book.
It's a place that he actually prevented 10 or 11 planned massacres of the Baha'is by the mullahs. Abdullah refers to that. At least 10 or 11. Some of them went through when they started, and some of them he speaks.
See, this shows you how forgiving God is.
Yeah.
If Baha'u'llah was prepared to forgive all that for the sake of a turning toward the most great peace.
Yeah.
Also, it shows how much the role of king is very important.
And Baha'u'llah was on the record, Baha'is, prominent Baha'is came and said, because there were a lot of killings of Baha'is during Baha'u'llahs, and they came up and said, why is he still in power? Why don't we just get rid of him? Because they knew he's like prophet of God and everything, he could finish him, but he said, if he goes away, the religious leaders will come back to power, and you will wish you would have never got rid of him.
So it was a political calculation not to kill.
He was saying that actually the religious leaders are by far many times more brutal than the secular king. That's what he was trying to convey. And he said that again.
It reminds me of Muhammad once said, the most evil of men will be the divines.
Oh, yeah?
Someday.
Yeah, he said that was at the end time.
Yeah. Okay, questions, comments about all this? I hope you find it interesting. I'm trying to make history alive again a little bit.
For the first time in my life, I got interested in history after reading.
That happened to me too.
Yeah, it does. I need to get the history.
First time, eh?
Okay, we have a decision to make. I just forgot. Next Sunday is on the...
A long weekend.
It's a long weekend, Thanksgiving weekend. I found out this place is open. We were supposed to have a class, but are all of you going to be having Thanksgiving dinner at home and not come here? Should we cancel it?
Well, these are all Persians, so they don't celebrate.
They don't care. So do we just keep on going, right?
Bring pumpkin
You're
squares.
Because it's the last session
Keep
on,
going.
it'll be the last 19 years of Baha'u'llah's life that we're looking at. In other words, when things started to go well, after all that persecution, finally he starts to be revered by people living in the whole northern Palestine area. Baha'is are free to visit Baha'u'llah. He can delegate all the administrivia to Abdu'l-Baha. Right? And Abdu'l-Baha is getting older, and more mature and powerful. Anyway, so that's an interesting, because it's like the persecution stops. It's hard to believe. There's been so much persecution. What would Baha'u'llah behave like if he wasn't persecuted? We get to see. And then the very last session is on Abdu'l-Baha and the Guardian and the founding of the House of Justice.
So next week we are on?
I guess we're gone and see who comes. And yeah.
You okay yourself?
I'm coming if you're coming. I mean, the building's open. And okay, good. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.